welcome to NTD China News. I'm Karen Chang. Making headlines this Thursday, January 10th. Crackdown begins as Southern Weekly resumes circulation. This man wants to appeal his labor camp sentence, but the courts won't listen. Why is Chinese society becoming less trusting? The newspaper that sparked the massive censorship debate in China is back and running this week. For many, it's business as usual, and that's true for Chinese authorities too. Anti-censorship protesters supporting Southern Weekly have been able to demonstrate since Monday. Today, however, that right was taken away as police moved in on them.
The fight against censorship in China is entering its second week. Authorities are now cracking down. Protesters outside the headquarters of Southern Weekly newspaper have been calling for press freedom since Monday. In a rare display of tolerance, the Chinese regime has let them demonstrate. Today, however, that patience seems to have run out. Police stuffed the demonstrators into vans among cries for help and charges of kidnapping. While few in number, these protesters had much support from netizens, activists, celebrities, and other media. Southern Weekly is back and running this week, but not without obvious resentment over its censorship. In its back pages, it calls for reform of media censorship to, quote, follow the pace of our time. The article references a Monday publication in the People's Daily, which said that the media should support the Communist Party. One microblogger also noted a shortage of 4 pages in this week's edition, most notably the current affairs and commentary sections. In solidarity with Southern Weekly, Beijing News published a tribute to porridge, a Chinese homophone to weekly. Bloggers have been using the term Southern porridge to refer to Southern Weekly and evade censorship. Beijing News is using the term to quietly express its opinions. Political observers see the censorship debate as the first major test for new party leader Xi Jinping. Coming into office, his predecessor, Hu Jintao, laid out a plan for the Chinese regime that included tentative reform. So far, this plan has proven to be mostly rhetoric.
China's reform through labor system has grabbed headlines recently, largely because it's seen as operating outside normal judicial process. A Beijing man sentenced last year to more than 2 years to a labor camp without a trial has been trying to appeal that sentence, but his lawyer says the case is going nowhere.
Cao Dong, seen here with his late wife, was arbitrarily arrested in Beijing last June and sentenced without trial to 2.5 years of reform through labor. His lawyer has been appealing ever since, but the courts won't hear the case.
The case was filed at the Beijing's Zhejiang District People's Court, the Intermediate and Higher People's Court. It went to all 3 levels, but still hasn't been accepted at any of them. They don't want this case to go to trial.
This isn't Cao's first encounter with China's labor camps. In 2006, he spoke to the Vice President of the European Parliament, Mr. Edward mcmillan-scott, who was visiting China at the time. Cao wanted to free his wife Yang Xiaojing. She was detained in a Beijing labor camp for practicing Falun Gong, a traditional Chinese spiritual practice. She died in 2009 after sustained injuries of interrogation and imprisonment. After he met with mcmillan-scott in 2006, security officials arrested Cao, who also practices Falun Gong. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and was not released until September 2011. Then, on June 8, 2012, police suddenly arrested him in Beijing. Without a trial, Cao was sent to labor camp for more than 2 years for carrying Falun Gong literature. Attorney Li says the sentence has no legal basis because there is no Chinese law that makes it illegal to possess Falun Gong books.
The authorities act arbitrarily. It's obvious now the judiciary isn't working on this, and it's eroding the legal system. It's a sad place for the country and citizens to be, because the country is not being ruled by law.
The Chinese regime's labor camp system allows police to sentence individuals to up to 4 years without any legal procedure. It's coming under mounting criticism for destroying the rule of law in China. This week, state-run media suggested the labor camp system would be put through reform. Observers say the devil is in the details. They will watch cautiously to see whether any positive change will be forthcoming.
For the second year now, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences has released a report on China's social mentality. This year's report shows that people's trust has been degraded both in other people and public institutions. Next, find out what's led to Chinese society being less trusting.
There is a rising distrust among Chinese citizens directed towards China's rulers. That's according to a report published on January 7th by the state-affiliated Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. The annual Blue Book of Social Mentality in China for 2012 identified 3 areas of the public's discontent: corrupt officials, business people, and public institutions. State-run media in China is one of the most influential public institutions and is used by the Communist Party as a constant political spin device. A former Chinese professor believes this is part of the reason why Chinese people don't trust the authorities.
Chinese media often reports false news, covering up the truth, especially when it comes to covering up the scandals of the Chinese Communist Party.
Sun also points to China's ineffective public appeal system. Petitioners are often turned away before they can make their appeal or are beaten and detained. The Blue Book also reports that less than half of Chinese citizens think they can trust people. Only 20 to 30% say they can trust strangers. The report cites the story of 2-year-old Xiao Yueyue. She was hit by 2 vehicles in October 2011 and was left bleeding on the street. 18 people walked past her before someone put her aside. She died a week later in hospital. Then there is the case of Peng Yu. He tried to help an elderly lady to a hospital, but was charged with her medical bill after being blamed for causing her injuries. The report also identifies what it calls a reverse mood. This is a trend in society where citizens applaud acts that used to be seen as unacceptable. A notable example is Yang Jia. He was questioned by police in 2008 for a traffic offense, but was beaten inside the police station. After a failed attempt to sue the police in question, he returned to the station, slashing and killing 6 cops. Instead of condemnation, the public widely hailed him as a hero for standing up to authorities who abused their power. The Blue Book reports called this public sentiment and lack of trust in general a threat to society.
And coming up after the break, a surprise surge in exports in December. US securities regulators say cooperation is lacking from Chinese counterparts, and why Chinese immigrants are packing their bags and leaving Italy. Welcome back. There's been a surprising surge in export growth from China in December after 7 quarters of slowdown. The latest data released on Thursday showed that the value of exports from China grew 14.1% in December compared to a year ago. But the uptick has been met with cautious optimism because global demand remains sluggish. That was also acknowledged by China's Customs Office in charge of releasing the figures. Spokesperson Zheng Yusheng said the country faces uncertainties in the coming year. Imports also improved in December, rising 6%. For the whole of 2012, though, both exports and imports missed the 10% target. Exports grew at 7.9%, imports by only 4.3%. International investment frauds are a huge concern for global investors. Yet recently, Chinese authorities have rejected requests to police major fraud cases, according to a former US official. It's causing frustration and suspicion for both governments and financiers.
Americans have lost billions of dollars in a string of fraudulent investments. Many are linked to China-based companies that have now been taken off of US stock markets. And according to a report by ABC News, Chinese regulators have not actively helped to stop this. In some cases, the Chinese firms were operating with the mindset of taking the money and run, then they disappear with investors' money. In most countries, that mentality does not turn into reality because procedural regulations and government oversight are in place to prevent it. These rules do exist in China too, but they're not always enforced. The United States Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, have investigated a number of Chinese firms suspected of fraud. But when they make high-level requests to their counterparts in China, cooperation isn't always forthcoming. The overall losses associated with recent Chinese companies defrauding U.S. investors are estimated at tens of billions of dollars. That's well over the sums lost in the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme. Fraudulent practices include companies over-exaggerating their financial numbers. U.S. investment authorities and stock markets say they will be much more vigilant in the future to prevent these types of fraud. Shapiro said the SEC will do what it can to recover what has been lost by U.S. investors, but conceded it's difficult without the cooperation of the foreign government.
Apple Inc. is looking to take a bigger bite of the Chinese market. Chief Executive Tim Cook met with the head of China Mobile today. The largest mobile carrier in the world currently does not sell Apple's flagship product, the iPhone. Reuters reports Cook spoke with China Mobile Chairman Xi Guohua on, quote, matters of cooperation. This is Cook's second trip to China in less than a year. Apple recently released its iPhone 5 in China. They're being sold through China Unicom and China Telecom. Prior to the iPhone 5's release in China, Apple saw its share of the market slowly decline. Apple hopes a deal with China Mobile will turn that around, but aside from banging out a contract that satisfies both sides, there are technical barriers in place. China Mobile runs on a different third-generation or 3G mobile technology to the rest of the world. Apple may have to wait for the company to start using 4G, which is slated to happen in the second half of this year. The world's largest electronics parts maker, Foxconn, is facing bribery allegations. Chinese authorities have launched an investigation into Foxconn over claims some of its employees were involved in bribery from its supplier partners in China. This comes after Taiwan's Next magazine published a report stating a company manager was arrested for accepting bribes from suppliers. Foxconn says it's cooperating with Chinese authorities while also conducting its own internal investigation. In recent years, Foxconn has been facing issues over poor labor practices. In 2009, the company was in the news for workers' suicides over poor working conditions. Last October, the company admitted employing underage interns at one of its operating plants in China. Taiwan-based Foxconn assembles products for companies like Apple, Sony, and Samsung. As the European debt crisis continues, residents are looking to healthier economies to make their living. This is true for Chinese immigrants who came to Europe to earn money. Now some are heading home or going to other countries where the economy is more stable.
Chinese immigrants in Italy are heading home, but not because they're homesick. Piazza Vittorio in central Rome used to be a thriving Chinatown. Now store owners say the economy is too bad to stay.
Now many businesses are closing. Near my restaurant, shops are closed or empty or being reopened as a different store and aren't Chinese anymore.
With higher taxes and more stringent policy on tax evasion, many Chinese immigrants are moving elsewhere. Some are going to other countries, others are going back to China. This travel agency says they're also seeing less Chinese travelers coming to Italy.
We've definitely seen a reduction in movement by Chinese clients, particularly Chinese businessmen with big or small enterprises in Italy.
The majority of Chinese immigrants in Italy are heading to the US and Canada, which are perceived to have healthier economies.
Many Chinese people have only been booking one-way tickets because they're closing their business here and returning to China or moving somewhere else.
Italy's debt is now roughly 120% of its GDP. It's paying 16% of that GDP in loan interest. Not everyone is leaving, though. Enrico Xu is a second-generation Chinese-Italian born in Rome. He says that connection to Italy means he'll stay put, no matter how tough the going gets.
And that's all for this broadcast of NTD China News. For more on China-related topics, visit our website at ntd.tv or subscribe to our YouTube channel, NTD on China. Coming up next is China Focus. I speak with NTD's senior China analyst He about all the talk of reform of Chinese labor camps. Stay tuned.